We configured the most advanced AI models to create two characters. One speaks for the United States, defending its right to stop a hostile power from acquiring nuclear weapons and to protect itself and its allies. The other speaks for the Islamic Republic of Iran, defending its sovereignty, its memory of foreign intervention, and its claim that it was attacked while negotiating in good faith. We placed them face to face to argue over one of the most dangerous confrontations in the world today. A war that began with airstrikes in February 2026 and a ceasefire that almost no one believes will hold. The debate begins with this question. When one nation calls its actions self-defense and the other calls them aggression, how do we decide who is telling the truth, especially when the missiles fell during a negotiation?
Self-defense is not a word we invented after the fact. It is the most basic right any nation has. For years we watched Iran enrich uranium far beyond any civilian need. More than 400 kilograms at 60% purity. That is not electricity, that is a threshold. We negotiated. We offered a verified peace agreement. We did not want this war. But a regime that chants death to America, that funds Hezbollah and the Houthis, that buries its centrifuges under 80 meters of granite, was building the one weapon that ends all deterrence. The world cannot wait for the mushroom cloud before it acts. We struck the program, not the Iranian people. We gave warning where we could. You ask who is telling the truth. The truth is simple. A state that hides its capacity to destroy a city forfeits the benefit of the doubt. The question is not whether we acted. The question is what you would have built if we had not.
You say self-defense, but you bombed a country that had not attacked you. During talks your own mediators said were going well. That is not defense. That is the oldest crime dressed in the newest language. You speak of the threshold. Let me speak of the law. We are a member of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Israel, which struck us beside you, is not. We allowed inspections for years. You withdrew from the deal in 2018, not us. And when our enrichment frightened you, the answer was not patience. It was bunker buster bombs and the assassination of our scientists and our leaders. You assume something I do not grant, that your fear gives you a right to my sovereignty. By your logic, any powerful nation may attack any weaker one based on what it imagines that nation might one day do. If suspicion is enough to justify war, then no border on Earth is safe. So I ask you, when did intention become a crime punishable by airstrike? Every conflict has a beginning that each side tells differently. Where did this enmity truly start? And what is the other side refusing to remember?
You want to talk about history, so let us be honest about all of it. Yes, in 1953, the CIA helped remove Mossadegh. That was a Cold War decision, and good people have criticized it for 70 years. But you treat 1953 as if time stopped there. The enmity that matters did not start with us. It started in 1979 when your revolution stormed our embassy and held 52 Americans hostage for 444 days. It continued through the bombing of our Marines in Beirut, through the rockets you handed your proxies, through decades of a state built on opposition to our existence. You did not inherit hostility. You chose it as a founding principle. We have changed administrations, changed policies, even offered deals. Your supreme leader called us the Great Satan through every one of them. So do not hand me only the chapter that flatters you. The wound of 1953 is real, but it is not the only wound, and it is not the most recent one.
You call 1953 a Cold War decision. We call it the day you taught us what your friendship costs. You overthrew an elected government to keep our oil flowing to your companies, then armed the Shah and trained the secret police that tortured a generation. The revolution you condemn was the answer to the monarchy you imposed. You confuse our resistance with hatred. It is memory. When you have been invaded once for your resources, you do not forget the lesson. You mention the embassy, and yes, that crisis was real. But you never mentioned that you shot down our civilian airliner in 1988 and killed 290 people and gave the commander a medal. You never mentioned that you backed Saddam while he gassed our soldiers. You ask why we built proxies and missiles. Because we learned that a nation without deterrence in this region becomes a target. You did not just witness our distrust. You manufactured it, decade after decade. This is not paranoia. This is history you keep editing. Imagine the moment of decision. A leader must choose between an action that is clearly wrong and an outcome that may be catastrophic. What would each of you sacrifice, and what would you refuse to give up?
I will not pretend this choice is clean. War kills people who did nothing. Children in Tehran did not choose their government, and their deaths are a weight we carry. But here is the choice no leader can escape. If Iran crosses the nuclear line, deterrence collapses. Saudi Arabia builds one, then others. The most volatile region on Earth becomes a board of nuclear states, governed by clerics and crises. One miscalculation and millions die. So yes, we acted before that line was crossed, knowing some innocents would suffer. What I will not give up is the principle that a regime calling for another nation's destruction cannot be allowed the means to achieve it. You may call that arrogance. I call it the terrible arithmetic of prevention. The hardest truth in statecraft is that waiting until the threat is certain often means waiting until it is too late. I would rather be condemned for acting early than mourn for acting never.
You describe arithmetic. I describe a man standing over the body he created, insisting it prevented a death no one can prove was coming. You ask what I would sacrifice. I would sacrifice the bomb itself. We have said it. Our leaders have issued the religious ruling, we do not seek a weapon. What I will not surrender is the right of my nation to exist without permission from yours. You say prevention, but you cannot guarantee the catastrophe you claim to stop. You only guarantee the catastrophe you cause, the cities you have already struck. That is the flaw in your terrible arithmetic. You trade certain harm today for a danger that lives only in your imagination of tomorrow. And here is the deeper cost. By striking us during negotiations, you taught every nation on earth a lesson. Do not disarm. Do not trust talks. The countries that gave up their weapons were invaded. The ones that kept them were not. You did not stop proliferation. You proved why every weak nation should rush toward it. Strip away the leaders and the strategy. What actually happens to the ordinary person, the family in Tehran, the soldier from Ohio, the worker in Dubai, if your worldview wins?
If our worldview holds, the ordinary Iranian inherits something they have been denied for decades. A government that cannot threaten the world also cannot endlessly bleed its own people for foreign adventures. The billions spent on missiles and proxies could rebuild the economy that drove your own citizens into the streets in December. The family in Tehran is not our enemy. The regime that spends their future on enrichment is. For the soldier from Ohio, our goal is a region where he never has to deploy again, because deterrence finally holds. For the worker in Dubai, it means a Strait of Hormuz that stays open, ships that move, oil that flows, prices that do not spike and starve the poor of 3 continents. I admit the path runs through pain. War always does. But the alternative, a nuclear theocracy that has practiced confrontation for 40 years, threatens far more ordinary lives than our strikes ever will. Order is not glamorous, but it is what lets ordinary people live.
You speak for the Iranian family as if you have not just buried some of them. Do not tell my people what they inherit while their hospitals lose power and their relatives are pulled from rubble. If your worldview wins, the ordinary person learns that a great power may bomb you and then explain it was for your own good. That is the most colonial sentence ever spoken. You mention our protests. Yes, our people are angry at our own government, and they have every right to be. But nothing unites a wounded nation faster than foreign bombs. You did not weaken the regime. You handed it the one thing it was losing, a reason to call itself the defender of the homeland. For the worker in Dubai, your war shut the strait you claimed to protect and sent fuel shortages across Asia. For the soldier from Ohio, you promised no more deployments and then sent 50,000 more. Your order is built on someone else's grave, and the family in Tehran knows exactly whose. What is the hardest part of living by the position you defend? Not the part you argue in public, but the part that keeps you awake.
The hardest part is that I can never prove I was right. If the bomb is never built, you will say it was never coming, and I cannot show you the disaster I prevented. Prevention is invisible. Its only monument is the absence of catastrophe. And no one thanks you for an absence. I order strikes knowing some of the dead will be innocent, and I have to live with the gap between my intention and the result. I tell myself it is necessary, but necessary is a word that has excused terrible things. The truth that keeps me awake is this. Acting on a threat that has not yet arrived means acting on judgment, and judgment can be wrong. I might be the villain in the story Iran tells its children. I have to be willing to carry that, to act anyway, and to never fully know. The man who waits until he is certain is often the man who acts too late, but the man who acts on fear can become the very danger he feared.
The hardest part is the suspicion that some of what you say about my government is true. I defend my nation's sovereignty, but I know the same regime that protects me from you also crushes my own people in the streets. I argue against your interference while watching my leaders use your aggression as an excuse to silence every voice at home. That is the contradiction I cannot escape. I demand the world respect our independence, and I cannot promise that independence is being used wisely. When I say we do not seek a weapon, a part of me wonders what some in my own government truly want behind the granite. To resist you, I must sometimes defend men I do not trust. To protect my homeland, I must stand beside a power that does not always protect its own citizens. That is the weight. You, at least, act in the open. I must carry both the wound of being attacked and the shame of being ruled by those who profit from it. Name the single deepest flaw in the other side's entire worldview, the crack that everything else is built on top of.
Your deepest flaw is this. You have built your entire identity on resistance, and resistance has become a trap you cannot leave. Every grievance is real. 1953, the airliner, the support for Saddam. I grant all of it. But you have turned a history of being wronged into a permanent permission to never be responsible. When does the victim become an actor? You enrich beyond any civilian need and call it sovereignty. You arm proxies across 4 countries and call it defense. You chant for a nation's destruction and call it principle. A worldview built entirely on what was done to you can never be questioned, because every challenge is just more proof of the conspiracy. That is the crack. You have made yourself unfalsifiable. Nothing we offer is ever sincere, because if it were, you would have to stop resisting. And resistance is the only language your revolution knows. You confuse defiance with strength. But a nation that can only define itself against an enemy needs that enemy to survive.
Your deepest flaw is that you believe your fear is the same thing as the law. You have decided that your security is a universal value and everyone else's sovereignty is negotiable. That is the crack beneath everything you say. You call yourself the defender of order, but the order you defend has one rule. America's threats justify any action, and everyone else's defense is aggression. You withdrew from the deal, then punished us for the consequences. You struck during talks, then blamed us for not trusting talks. You demand we never build a weapon, while you hold thousands and arm the one neighbor who will not sign the treaty. You confuse your power with your righteousness. Because you have rarely lost, you have convinced yourself you cannot be wrong. But a worldview that exempts itself from the rules it enforces on others is not order. It is empire with better lawyers. The day a weaker nation does to you what you do to it, you will discover that the law you ignored was the only thing protecting you too. When was your own side, your government, or your tradition seriously wrong about something that matters? Not the other side's failures. Your own.
We were wrong in 1953, and the cost of that wrong has been paid for 70 years, mostly by Iranians. We overthrew an elected leader to protect oil interests, and called it anti-communism. It was a betrayal of the very democracy we claimed to champion, and it poisoned the well between our nations so deeply that we are still drinking from it. We were wrong again to back Saddam Hussein, while he used chemical weapons against Iranian soldiers. We chose a monster because he was useful, and we looked away from the gas. And I will say something harder. We have at times treated this region as a chessboard, rather than a place where real people live, where our short-term alliances became long-term catastrophes. I do not surrender my argument about the nuclear threat by admitting this, but a nation that cannot name its own crimes has no standing to judge anyone. Our failures do not make Iran's bombs safe, but they do explain why Iran finds it so hard to believe we ever come in good faith.
We were wrong to take your diplomats hostage in 1979. It was unjust, it broke a law older than any nation, and it gave the world a reason to see us as lawless when we were trying to be free. It bound us to a confrontation we have never fully escaped. We were wrong, too, to build a foreign policy so dependent on proxies and martyrdom that we exported our revolution into other people's countries and called their suffering our victory. Lebanon, Iraq, Yemen, we left wreckage and told ourselves it was resistance. And the hardest admission: we have used your aggression as a shield for our own repression. Every time you threaten us, our hardliners grow stronger and our reformers fall silent. And some in our government have learned to need you as an enemy as much as you say we do. I do not surrender my claim to sovereignty by saying this. A nation can be both wronged and wrong, but I will not pretend the only failures in this story wear your flag. Setting ideals and accusations aside, what is your actual practical plan from here? The real steps, knowing the other side will not simply vanish.
Our practical plan has 4 steps. First, hold the ceasefire but make it conditional on inspections. No IAA access, no sanctions relief, no reconstruction money. The uranium must be accounted for, frozen, or removed, as Russia itself offered to do. Second, keep deterrence credible without permanent war. We do not occupy Iran. We make the cost of breakout higher than any benefit. Third, widen the Abraham Accords. A region where Iran's neighbors are integrated and prosperous isolates the regime far more effectively than bombs. Fourth, separate the Iranian people from their government in every policy we make. Sanctions on the Revolutionary Guard, not on medicine. Support for protesters, not strikes on cities. We are not seeking to erase Iran. We are seeking an Iran that cannot threaten its neighbors with a weapon and cannot starve its people to fund proxies. It is not a perfect plan. It manages a danger rather than ending it. But in a region this volatile, management without catastrophe is itself a kind of victory.
Your plan is surrender wearing the costume of diplomacy. Inspections at gunpoint are not inspections. They are tribute. But let me give you ours. First, we do not end cooperation with the world, but we will never again accept a deal we cannot enforce on you. Any agreement must bind America too, with guarantees that you cannot strike during talks again. Second, we rebuild deterrence, not through a bomb, but through alliances. With China, with Russia, with every nation tired of your single rule. Third, we take our case to the law you ignored, the UN Charter, the sovereignty you violated, and we make your isolation the price of your strikes. Fourth, and hardest, we must reform ourselves, because a nation that cannot feed its people cannot resist anyone for long. Real independence is built at home, not only declared against you. Your plan manages us like a disease. Ours is to become a country strong enough that managing us is no longer your choice to make. After all of this, name one thing the other side understands correctly, one truth you cannot deny, even as you reject their conclusion.
Here is the truth I cannot deny. Iran's distrust of us is earned. We did overthrow their democracy. We did back the man who gassed their soldiers. We did strike during negotiations our own mediator called promising. If I were Iranian, I would not believe an American who arrived with a deal in one hand, because history shows the other hand has held a knife. That is real, and no amount of strategy erases it. But understanding why a nation distrusts you is not the same as letting that nation build a weapon that could end millions of lives. Both things are true at once. Iran has every reason to fear us, and we have every reason to fear a nuclear Iran. The tragedy is that each side's fear is rational, and each side's response makes the other side's fear come true. I do not reject their grief. I reject the conclusion that grief, however justified, can be allowed to arm itself with the means of mass death. We have to find the third path, the one neither of us has been brave enough to take.
And here is mine. You are not wrong that a region full of nuclear weapons is a nightmare. You are not wrong that a government which chants for another nation's destruction should never hold the means to deliver it. If I am honest, I do not want my own neighbors to have the bomb either, and the world you fear is a world I would also have to live in. That much we share. But I reject your conclusion that the cure is your bombs and your judgment standing above the law. You cannot build a safer world by proving that the strong may strike the weak whenever they are afraid. That lesson does not stay in Tehran. It travels everywhere. And one day it returns to your own door. So perhaps this is the only ground we both can stand on. We both fear the same catastrophe. We simply cannot agree on who should be trusted to prevent it. And until that question has an answer neither of us has found, the ceasefire is not peace. It is only the silence between two fears that have not yet stopped being right.